The galaxy was vast, filled with countless stars, civilizations, and dangers. Humanity, once confined to Earth, had spread across the stars, but they were still seen as the underdogs. Older, more advanced species viewed them as primitive, their technology crude and their ambitions small. But humanity had a secret weapon: resilience. And nowhere was that resilience more evident than in the story of the Eclipse, a warship born from scrap and destined to become the most advanced vessel in the galaxy. It began on a forgotten planet, a junkyard world called Kasari 9. The planet was a graveyard for derelict ships, broken machines, and discarded technology from countless civilizations. It was here, in the shadow of towering heaps of metal, that a small group of human engineers and scavengers worked tirelessly. Among them was a man named John, a grizzled engineer with a knack for seeing potential where others saw only junk. John had spent years on Kasari 9, salvaging parts and dreaming of building something extraordinary. One day, while exploring the remains of an ancient alien warship, he stumbled upon a discovery that would change everything: a nearly intact quantum core, a device capable of powering a ship far beyond anything humanity had ever built. The core was damaged, but John knew it could be repaired. With it, he could create a warship unlike any other. Gathering his team, John laid out his plan. They would build a ship from the scraps around them, a ship that could rival even the most advanced vessels of the galactic powers. It was a crazy idea, but the team was inspired by John's vision. They worked day and night, welding, coding, and assembling. The ship began to take shape, a patchwork of alien and human technology, held together by ingenuity and sheer determination. The Eclipse was unlike any other ship. Its hull was a mosaic of salvaged armor, its engines a hybrid of human and alien designs. But its heart was the quantum core, a marvel of engineering that hummed with barely contained power. As the final pieces fell into place, the team stood back and admired their creation. It was rough, unpolished, and far from perfect, but it was theirs. Little did they know, the Eclipse was about to be tested in ways they could never have imagined. A distress signal reached Kasari 9, a plea for help from a human colony under attack by the Zarkon Empire, one of the most powerful factions in the galaxy. The Zarkon had long looked down on humanity, seeing them as weak and insignificant. Now, they were making their move, crushing any human outpost that dared to stand in their way. John and his team knew they couldn't stand by. The Eclipse was ready, or as ready as it would ever be. With a crew of volunteers, they powered up the ship and set course for the besieged colony. As the Eclipse left the atmosphere of Kasari 9, its engines roared to life, and the quantum core pulsed with energy. It was a ship built from scrap. But it carried the hopes of all humanity. The journey ahead would be dangerous, and the odds were against them. But John and his crew were determined to prove that humanity was more than just a footnote in the galaxy's history. The Eclipse was their answer, a symbol of what humanity could achieve when pushed to its limits. From scrap to supreme, it was a warship unlike any other, and its story was just beginning. The Eclipse surged through the void of space, its engines humming with a power that felt alive. The crew, a mix of engineers, pilots, and fighters, moved with purpose, each aware of the monumental task ahead. John stood on the bridge, his eyes fixed on the starry expanse. The distress signal from the human colony played on repeat in the background, a haunting reminder of what was at stake. The Zarkon Empire had attacked without warning, and the colony's defenses were crumbling. Time was running out. As the ship approached the edge of the colony system, the crew prepared for the worst. Scans revealed a Zarkon fleet orbiting the colony, their sleek, menacing ships a stark contrast to the Eclipse's patchwork design. The Zarkon vessels were symbols of perfection, their technology centuries ahead of humanity's. But John had faith in his ship. The Eclipse was more than just metal and wires, it was a testament to human ingenuity and determination. "We're outnumbered and outgunned," said Lisa, the ship's tactical officer, her voice steady but tense. But if we hit them fast and hard, we might stand a chance. John nodded. We're not here to win a war. We're here to save lives. Focus on creating a distraction so the colony can evacuate. The Eclipse dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, its arrival unnoticed by the Zarkon fleet. The crew worked quickly, deploying a series of drones to mimic the signature of a larger fleet. It was a risky move, but it was their best shot. As the drones activated, the Zarkon ships began to shift, their formation breaking as they moved to investigate the false threat. Now's our chance, John said, gripping the edge of the command console. Take us in. The Eclipse shot forward, its hybrid engines propelling it faster than any human-built ship had a right to move. The Zarkon ships were slow to react, their commanders underestimating the scrappy vessel. As the Eclipse closed in on the colony, its weapons came online, a mix of salvaged alien cannons and human-designed railguns. The first shots rang out, striking a Zarkon destroyer and forcing it to break formation. Chaos erupted as the Eclipse weaved through the enemy fleet, its agility and speed catching the Zarkon off guard. The crew worked in perfect harmony, their months of training and preparation paying off. But the Zarkon were not easily defeated. Their ships began to regroup, their superior firepower quickly overwhelming the Eclipse's defenses. "Shields are down to 40%, shouted Mike, the ship's engineer, his voice barely audible over the alarms blaring across the bridge. "We just need to hold them off a little longer," John replied, his eyes fixed on the colony below. The evacuation ships were lifting off, their engines flaring as they fled to safety. The Eclipse had done its job, but the cost was becoming clear. As the last of the evacuation ships disappeared into hyperspace, the Eclipse turned to make its escape. But the Zarkon were not about to let them go. A massive cruiser moved to block their path, its weapons charging for a final, devastating strike. John clenched his fists. Brace for impact. The bridge of the Eclipse was a storm of noise and light. Alarms blared, screens flashed red, and the crew shouted over the chaos as the Zarkon cruiser loomed ahead, its weapons glowing with deadly energy. John gripped the command console, his mind racing. They were out of options, or so it seemed. "We can't take another hit," Mike yelled, his hands flying over the engineering controls. "The quantum core is overheating, and the shields are gone." John's eyes darted to the main screen, where the Zarkon cruiser filled the view. He knew they couldn't outrun it, and they couldn't outgun it. But the Eclipse wasn't just any ship. It was a patchwork of human and alien technology, built with creativity and desperation. And sometimes, creativity was the deadliest weapon of all. "Lisa, reroute all power to the engines," John ordered, his voice calm but firm. "Mike, I need you to stabilize the quantum core. We're going to do something stupid." Lisa hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "You heard him. Rerouting power." The Eclipse shuddered as its engines roared to life, the ship lurching forward with sudden, terrifying speed. The Zarkon cruiser fired, a massive energy beam slicing through the void. But the Eclipse was already moving, its agility and speed defying its scrappy appearance. The beam missed by inches, the shockwave rattling the ship but leaving it intact. "Now what?" Lisa asked, her voice tense. John smiled faintly. "Now we show them why you don't underestimate humanity." The Eclipse turned sharply, its trajectory taking it straight toward the Zarkon cruiser. The enemy ship's commanders clearly hadn't expected such a reckless move. As the Eclipse closed the distance, John activated a hidden feature of the ship, a weapon they had salvaged from an ancient alien wreck. It was untested, unpredictable, and their only hope. Firing the pulse cannon. John shouted. A blinding beam of energy erupted from the Eclipse, striking the Zarkon cruiser's shields. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the cruiser's systems began to fail, its shields flickering and collapsing. The pulse cannon had overloaded their power grid, leaving them vulnerable. "Now, hit them with everything we've got," John ordered. The Eclipse's weapons unleashed a barrage of fire, striking the cruiser's exposed hull. Explosions rippled across the enemy ship, its once imposing form now crippled and adrift. The crew cheered, but John knew they weren't out of danger yet. The rest of the Zarkon fleet was still out there, and the Eclipse was running on fumes. "Get us out of here," John said, slumping into his chair. Before they regroup. The Eclipse jumped into hyperspace, leaving the Zarkon fleet behind. The crew breathed a collective sigh of relief, but the victory was bittersweet. They had saved the colony, but the battle had taken its toll. The ship was damaged, the quantum core was unstable, and the Zarkon Empire would not forget this humiliation. As the Eclipse drifted through hyperspace, John stared at the star map on the main screen. They had proven that humanity could stand up to the galaxy's greatest powers, but the fight was far from over. The Zarkon would come for them, and next time, they would be ready. The Eclipse was more than just a ship. It was a symbol of humanity's resilience, a beacon of hope in a galaxy that had written them off. And John knew that as long as they had the Eclipse, they had a chance. The Eclipse emerged from hyperspace near a remote asteroid belt, far from the prying eyes of the Zarkon Empire. The crew worked tirelessly to repair the damage from the battle, their hands blackened with grease and their faces etched with exhaustion. The ship was a mess, bulkheads were scorched, systems were fried, and the quantum core was still dangerously unstable. But the crew refused to give up. They had come too far to let their ship fall apart now. John moved through the ship, inspecting the repairs and offering encouragement where he could. He knew the crew was running on fumes, but so was he. The weight of their mission pressed heavily on his shoulders. They had struck a blow against the Zarkon, but it was only a matter of time before the Empire retaliated. The Eclipse needed to be ready. "We've stabilized the quantum core for now," Mike reported, wiping sweat from his brow. "But it's a temporary fix. If we push it too hard again, it could blow us all to stardust." John nodded grimly. "We'll have to find a permanent solution. Any ideas?" Mike hesitated, then pulled up a star map on a nearby console. "There's a place called the Forge. It's an ancient shipyard, abandoned for centuries. If the stories are true, it's filled with advanced technology, stuff that could help us fix the core and upgrade the Eclipse. But it's deep in uncharted space, and no one's been there in generations." John studied the map, his mind racing. It was a long shot, but they were out of options. "Set a course for the Forge. We don't have a choice." The journey was tense. The Eclipse was in no condition for another fight, and the crew knew it. They moved quietly, avoiding patrols and staying off the radar. Days turned into weeks as they traveled deeper into uncharted space, the stars growing sparse and the void feeling colder with each passing hour. Finally, they arrived at the Forge. It was a massive structure, floating in the shadow of a dying star. The shipyard was ancient, its metal hull pitted and scarred by centuries of neglect. But as the Eclipse approached, sensors picked up faint energy signatures, proof that the facility was still operational, at least in part. "This place gives me the creeps," Lisa muttered as the crew prepared to board the shipyard. "Who knows what's waiting for us in there?" "Whatever it is, we'll handle it," John replied, though he shared her unease. "We need those upgrades." The boarding party moved cautiously through the derelict shipyard, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The air was thick with dust, and the walls were covered in strange, alien symbols. It felt like walking through a tomb. But as they ventured deeper, they began to find what they were looking for: advanced machinery, intact power systems, and even a few intact quantum cores. "This is it," Mike said, his voice filled with awe. "We can use this to fix the Eclipse and make it even stronger." But as the crew began to gather the supplies, a low hum filled the air. The lights flickered on, revealing a massive, robotic sentinel blocking their path. Its eyes glowed red, and its voice echoed through the chamber. Unauthorized access detected. Eliminating intruders. The crew scrambled for cover as the sentinel opened fire. The Eclipse had survived the Zarkon, but the Forge was proving to be just as dangerous. And the fight for humanity's future was far from over. The robotic sentinel was a towering monstrosity, its armored plating gleaming under the flickering lights of the Forge. Its weapons whirred to life, unleashing a barrage of energy blasts that forced the crew of the Eclipse to dive for cover. John crouched behind a crumbling console, his mind racing. They hadn't come this far to be taken down by a glorified security guard. "We need to shut it down," John shouted over the chaos. "Mike, any ideas?" Mike, who was huddled behind a stack of crates, peeked out to study the sentinel. "There's a control panel on its back. If we can get to it, we might be able to disable it." "Easier said than done," Lisa muttered, firing a few shots from her sidearm. The energy bolts bounced harmlessly off the sentinel's armor. "This thing's built like a tank." John clenched his jaw. They didn't have time for a prolonged fight. The sentinel was slowly advancing, its heavy footsteps shaking the ground. If they didn't act fast, they'd be cornered, or worse. "I'll distract it," John said, grabbing a piece of debris. "Lisa, you and Mike flank it and go for the control panel. Ready?" Before anyone could argue, John stood and hurled the debris at the sentinel. It clanged against the machine's head, drawing its attention. They traveled deeper into uncharted space, the stars growing sparse and the void feeling colder with each passing hour. Finally, they arrived at the Forge. It was a massive structure, floating in the shadow of a dying star. The shipyard was ancient, its metal hull pitted and scarred by centuries of neglect. But as the Eclipse approached, sensors picked up faint energy signatures, proof that the facility was still operational, at least in part. "This place gives me the creeps," Lisa muttered as the crew prepared to board the shipyard. "Who knows what's waiting for us in there?" "Whatever it is, we'll handle it," John replied, though he shared her unease. "We need those upgrades." The boarding party moved cautiously through the derelict shipyard, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The air was thick with dust, and the walls were covered in strange, alien symbols. It felt like walking through a tomb. But as they ventured deeper, they began to find what they were looking for: advanced machinery, intact power systems, and even a few intact quantum cores. "This is it," Mike said, his voice filled with awe. "We can use this to fix the Eclipse and make it even stronger." But as the crew began to gather the supplies, a low hum filled the air. The lights flickered on, revealing a massive, robotic sentinel blocking their path. Its eyes glowed red, and its voice echoed through the chamber. "Unauthorized access detected. Eliminating intruders." The crew scrambled for cover as the sentinel opened fire. The Eclipse had survived the Zarkon, but the Forge was proving to be just as dangerous. And the fight for humanity's future was far from over. The robotic sentinel was a towering monstrosity, its armored plating gleaming under the flickering lights of the Forge. Its weapons whirred to life, unleashing a barrage of energy blasts that forced the crew of the Eclipse to dive for cover. John crouched behind a crumbling console, his mind racing. They hadn't come this far to be taken down by a glorified security guard. "We need to shut it down," John shouted over the chaos. "Mike, any ideas?" Mike, who was huddled behind a stack of crates, peeked out to study the sentinel. "There's a control panel on its back. If we can get to it, we might be able to disable it." "Easier said than done," Lisa muttered, firing a few shots from her sidearm. The energy bolts bounced harmlessly off the sentinel's armor. "This thing's built like a tank." John clenched his jaw. They didn't have time for a prolonged fight. The sentinel was slowly advancing, its heavy footsteps shaking the ground. If they didn't act fast, they'd be cornered, or worse. "I'll distract it," John said, grabbing a piece of debris. "Lisa, you and Mike flank it and go for the control panel. Ready?" Before anyone could argue, John stood and hurled the debris at the Sentinel. It clanged against the machine's head, drawing its attention. The Sentinel turned, its glowing eyes locking onto John. He sprinted to the side, dodging another volley of energy blasts as Lisa and Mike moved into position. The Sentinel was relentless, its weapons tracking John's every move. He ducked and weaved, using the shipyard's debris as cover. But he was running out of room to maneuver. Just as the Sentinel closed in, Lisa and Mike reached its back. "Got it!" Mike shouted, his hands flying over the control panel. "Just need a few more seconds." The Sentinel seemed to sense what was happening. It turned, its massive arm swinging toward Mike and Lisa. John acted on instinct, grabbing a loose cable and whipping it at the Sentinel's legs. The machine stumbled, giving Mike the time he needed. "Done!" Mike yelled, slamming his hand on the panel. The Sentinel froze, its glowing eyes dimming as it powered down. The crew stood in silence for a moment, catching their breath. The shipyard was quiet again, save for the faint hum of ancient machinery. "Let's not do that again," Lisa said, holstering her sidearm. With the Sentinel neutralized, the crew got to work. They gathered the supplies they needed, advanced components, a new quantum core, and even a few alien weapons that could be integrated into the Eclipse. The forge was a treasure trove of technology, and they took full advantage of it. As they loaded the supplies onto the Eclipse, John couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. The ship was already a marvel, but with these upgrades, it could become something truly extraordinary. They were no longer just scavengers building a ship from scraps. They were pioneers, pushing the boundaries of what humanity could achieve. But as the Eclipse prepared to leave the forge, sensors picked up an incoming signal. It was faint at first, but it grew stronger with each passing second. John's heart sank as he realized what it was. "Zarkon ships," Lisa said, her voice tense. "They've found us." The crew exchanged grim looks. They had the upgrades, but they weren't ready for another fight. The Zarkon were relentless, and they wouldn't stop until the Eclipse was destroyed. John straightened his shoulders. "Let's show them what we're made of." The Eclipse powered up its engines, the newly installed quantum core humming with energy. The crew moved with precision, their training and determination evident in every action. The Zarkon fleet was closing in, their ships appearing on the scanners like a swarm of predators. John stood on the bridge, his eyes fixed on the incoming threat. They had come too far to lose now. "We've got 3 cruisers and a dozen fighters," Lisa reported, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "They'll be in firing range in 2 minutes." John nodded, his mind racing. The Eclipse was stronger now, but it still wasn't a match for an entire Zarkon fleet. They needed a plan, something unexpected. "Mike, how's the new core holding up?" John asked. Mike checked the readings. "It's stable, but we're pushing it to its limits. If we overuse it, we could fry the entire system." "Understood," John said. "Lisa, prepare the pulse cannon. We'll hit them hard and fast, then make a run for it." The crew sprang into action. The pulse cannon, upgraded with technology from the forge, was their best weapon. But it was also a double-edged sword, using it too much could cripple the Eclipse. They had to make every shot count. The Zarkon fleet entered firing range, their weapons charging with a menacing glow. The Eclipse was outnumbered and outgunned, but it was far from helpless. John gripped the edge of the command console, his voice calm but firm. "Fire the pulse cannon." A blinding beam of energy erupted from the Eclipse, striking the lead Zarkon cruiser. The enemy ship's shields flickered and collapsed, its systems overloading in a cascade of sparks and explosions. The other Zarkon ships hesitated, their commanders clearly unprepared for such a devastating attack. "Now, hit them with everything we've got," John ordered. The Eclipse's weapons unleashed a barrage of fire, targeting the weakened cruiser. It exploded in a brilliant flash, debris scattering into the void. The Zarkon fighters swarmed the Eclipse, their energy blasts peppering the ship's hull. The shields held, but just barely. "Shields at 30%. Mike shouted. "We can't take much more of this." John's eyes darted to the star map. There was a nearby nebula, its swirling gases and magnetic interference providing the perfect cover. If they could reach it, they might be able to lose the Zarkon. "Set a course for the nebula," John said. "Full speed ahead." The Eclipse surged forward, its engines roaring as it raced toward the nebula. The Zarkon ships gave chase, their weapons firing relentlessly. The Eclipse shuddered under the barrage, but it held together, its patchwork hull proving stronger than anyone had expected. As they entered the nebula, the sensors went haywire. The swirling gases and magnetic fields disrupted the Zarkon's targeting systems, giving the Eclipse the advantage. John ordered the crew to cut power to non-essential systems, making the ship harder to detect. The Zarkon ships faltered, their formation breaking as they struggled to navigate the nebula. The Eclipse slipped through the chaos, its crew holding their breath as they waited for the right moment to make their escape. "Now," John said quietly. The Eclipse jumped into hyperspace, leaving the Zarkon fleet behind. The crew erupted into cheers, their relief palpable. They had done the impossible, again. But John knew the fight wasn't over. The Zarkon would come for them, and next time, they would be ready. The Eclipse was no longer just a ship. It was a symbol of humanity's defiance, a beacon of hope in a galaxy that had underestimated them for too long. The Eclipse emerged from hyperspace near a remote human outpost, its hull scorched but intact. The crew was exhausted, their faces etched with the strain of battle, but there was a newfound determination in their eyes. They had faced the Zarkon Empire and lived to tell the tale. But they knew this was only the beginning. John stood on the bridge, staring at the star map. The Zarkon would not forget the humiliation the Eclipse had dealt them. They would regroup, and they would come back stronger. Humanity needed to be ready. "We've proven what the Eclipse can do," John said, addressing the crew. "But this ship isn't just ours. It belongs to all of humanity. It's a symbol of what we can achieve when we work together." The crew nodded, their resolve unwavering. They had started as scavengers, building a ship from scraps on a forgotten junkyard world. Now, they were pioneers, their creation a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. But their work was far from over. Over the next few weeks, the Eclipse became a rallying point for humanity. News of its victories spread across the colonies, inspiring hope in those who had once felt powerless. Engineers, scientists, and soldiers flocked to the outpost, offering their skills to improve the ship and prepare for the battles to come. The Eclipse underwent a transformation. Its patchwork hull was reinforced with advanced alloys, its weapons upgraded with cutting-edge technology. The quantum core, once unstable, was now a marvel of engineering, capable of powering the ship to new heights. But the most significant change was in the crew. They were no longer just a group of scavengers, they were a family, united by a common purpose. As the Eclipse prepared for its next mission, John received a transmission. It was from the leaders of the human colonies, a coalition that had formed in the wake of the Zarkon attacks. They had a proposal. "The Eclipse has become a symbol of hope," the leader said, his voice filled with admiration. "We want you to lead a fleet, to unite humanity and take the fight to the Zarkon. Will you accept this responsibility?" John looked at his crew, their faces filled with determination. They had come so far, and they were ready for the next step. He turned back to the screen and nodded. "We'll do it," John said. "For humanity." The Eclipse became the flagship of a new fleet, a coalition of human ships united under a single banner. Together, they faced the Zarkon Empire, not as underdogs, but as equals. The battles were fierce, but the Eclipse led the charge, its name becoming synonymous with courage and defiance. In the end, it wasn't just about winning the war. It was about proving that humanity belonged among the stars. The Eclipse, born from scrap and forged in battle, became a legend, a symbol of what humanity could achieve when pushed to its limits. And as the stars burned brightly in the void, the Eclipse sailed on. A beacon of hope in a galaxy that had once doubted them. From scrap to supreme, it was humanity's greatest achievement, and its story was far from over.